Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. And I'm back. So many of you knew that I was on holiday. I was coming back from that, went to a family event the day before I was due to come home, and I got a bug there. So I was watching all last weekend's action, feeling pretty grim, and I just wasn't up to doing any videos. And by the next day, I was just laid out in bed, and I had 4 days of bed rest. Complete sleeping, feeling grim, all that sort of usual stuff. And by the way, it was not COVID. So I haven't really been away for 2 years. So I've been sort of hibernating, staying out of the way. And the first time I go out, get sick. Obviously, I knew that was probably a possibility, but I thought I'll chance it anyway, and I paid the price. But anyway, getting back to this, and you might note as well, back on the microphone, got, back home, normal setup, not on the road with the sort of, as someone said, it sounded like I was being held captive in a wardrobe. But what I wanted to do for this video was just talk in brief about some of those fights from last week, because obviously I didn't do those post-fight reviews, so I'm not going to go sort of blow by blow and all that sort of stuff in those fights, but there were some good fights in the heavyweight division. Martin Bakole, Tony Yoka, that was, as I said going into it, that was a very tough fight for both. The biggest test of their respective careers to date. Martin Bakole on the rebuild after a Michael Hunter loss almost 4 years ago. Tony Yoka stepping up to another level. It seemed like it was going to be a 50-50 or somewhere close to it. And it ended up being far from it. And I want to discuss that too, because Tony Yoka did not cover himself in glory. Also, Kubrat Pulev rolled back the years, proved that there's still something in the tank. We'll talk about that. And the surprise return of Agit Kabayel. And that was sort of out of the blue because it wasn't even listed on BoxRec, and it was like, wow, okay, he's on a card, and we'll discuss that fight. There were some other guys in action over this past weekend. You had Ronnie Hines. He was on a pay-per-view card. He was facing Luis Pascual, the Mexican heavyweight. That was a second round win for him. You had the French prospect Murad Aliev. He was back in action. He was on the Avni Yildirim card in Turkey. He got a win. Umut Kamkaran, he was also on the same card as Agit Kabayel. He also got a win, a fourth round stoppage from memory. So that's all I'm going to cover on those fights. But we'll start first with Martin Bakole and Tony Yoka. Because heading into it, like I say, very good fight. And I think people sort of thought the story of the fight would be a very tough, competitive 6 or 7 rounds, and possibly a maybe heavier than he should be Martin Bakole starting to tire, starting to get picked off by Tony Yoka, and potentially Yoka getting a decision, maybe a late stoppage. But there always was the possibility that Martin Bakole was going to win this fight, and possibly by stoppage. And certainly ahead of the fight, I was also saying, is this going to be the fight where we see Yoka's whiskers tested? Because there's always been a question mark. Tony Yoka from the amateurs, there had been questions about the durability, had been stopped, all that sort of stuff. What was going to happen here? Because he'd faced a lot of decent names ahead of this fight, but no real big punches. And that sort of lent itself to be, well, what was going to happen when he faced a puncher? And we saw it. Tony Yoka in that first round, he was caught by a lot of big, heavy shots. Martin Bakole coming forward, basically crisp jabs, crisp hooks to the body and head. And the kryptonite, one of the kryptonites in this fight for Tony Yoka was the left hook. And that's obviously something they must have been looking at ahead of the fight, obviously back to his amateur days. That right hand does drop down, leave an opening. And this is one of the things that the commentator either wasn't seeing or calling. There were some left hooks coming in that first round, especially one in particular. I can remember this is well ahead of the knockdown. I thought, it looks like that actually rocked Tony Yoka. And he kind of almost did a bit of a dance. He was like unsteady for about a second or so as he backed up. Wasn't called, and I thought, this is not looking good for Yoka. It was a very strong round for Martin Bakole, and it set the tone for the fight. And basically, the winning of that fight was round 1. Tony Yoka, his chin was cracked. He didn't like that power. And that basically had him in a trance almost. He was in some sort of spell for the first sort of 4 or 5 rounds. It was almost like he didn't know what was going on. It was just, yeah, he was shell-shocked. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And I sort of had said in a tweet at the time as I was live tweeting, it's almost like a sense of shell shock. Tony Yoka getting beaten up here and pummeled by Martin Bakole. That first round, Bakole, everything hard, crisp and sharp. And that did the damage. And Tony Yoka, from that point on, there were a few moments where he tried to sort of come back. Obviously, I think for the first few rounds, he was like weathering a storm. He had 1 or 2 rounds where he started to be a little bit more on even footing. But as soon as he started to make even just a little dent or an inroad, Bakole would come back with half a dozen hard thudding shots. And Tony Yoka just didn't like it. And what we saw in the second half of the fight was Yoka not taking advantage of what I think were opportunities. Because that second half of the fight, and we'll come to the scorecard soon because it was disgraceful, Martin Bakole, after 5 rounds, he looked like he was tiring. His footwork was starting to deteriorate, as someone had come to the channel ahead of the fight and said of the Sergey Kuzmin fight. After a certain point, Martin Bakole's footwork became non-existent. He was like a paraplegic just throwing straight punches. That was the comment sort of made. And you had a little bit of that in the second half of the fight. The legs stopped moving. The arms were a lot lower. There were openings. But Tony Yoka, just every now and then snipe in with something. He was too concerned with what was coming back. And that all started in round 1, taking those heavy hooks, straight punches, jabs. The body work really sort of took it out of him as well. And that was something that Tony Yoka didn't take advantage of, because there was almost 280 pounds of Martin Bakole to start pummeling away on, especially as he tired. He just didn't want to risk it. He didn't want to engage. He didn't want to go in there and try to work away on him when he seemingly, at least from round 6 to about round 8, was on more of an even footing. You saw those rounds were basically pretty tight, pretty even. Martin Bakole slowing down. But the thing was, because Tony Yoka was so reticent to engage, Martin Bakole was able to keep basically setting the pace. He was able to manage his own output. He was throwing a lot less, but he was still, if Tony Yoka landed something, he'd try to land 2 or 3 shots back. He was answering every time Yoka tried to do something. But Yoka did not cover himself here in glory. And you heard, especially in that second half of the fight, because they were always going to Yoka's corner, Virgil Hunter imploring him. Those last couple of rounds where Yoka needed to go for broke, he didn't. He looked content to survive, looked content to do the rounds and not take the risk to try to win the fight. And as we know, one of the judges tried to, as hard as they could, to give that fight to Tony Yoka. He gave 6 of the 10 rounds, and remember, 2 knockdowns, round 1, round 5, and I'll come to that second knockdown soon. He had it 6-4 to Tony Yoka, which with the knockdowns, it was an even fight. That's got to be one of the worst scorecards I think I've seen in recent memories. That's Adelaide Bird-esque territory from Canelo Golovkin 118-110 in that one, where, yeah, arguably Golovkin won that fight and it was ruled a draw. 6 rounds for Yoka. After the first 5 rounds, I had it 5-zip to Martin Bakole, and he had those 2 knockdowns. So for me, there was no way back. And I think you can make an argument with some of those later rounds from round 6 to round 10. More even, there wasn't a lot going on, the volume dropped, but Tony Yoka just didn't take advantage. And like I say, Martin Bakole seemingly was there at points to be hit, but Tony Yoka didn't want to let his hands go. And in fact, in the final couple of rounds, he was content to stand off and basically run. He wasn't trying to win that fight. All he was trying to do was survive. It was pretty disappointing. But like I say, round 1 was the winning of that fight. Martin Bakole came out and beat the spirit out of Tony Yoka. He beat the win and the fight out of Yoka. And after that, it was all downhill. Yoka was there, but he wasn't showing us what he could do. And that was the disappointing thing. Well, there were multiple disappointing things with his performance. But it's the skill in terms of what he's got, his skills. I mean, I think he's a more skilled fighter than Martin Bakole. But Martin Bakole, heavy-handed, showed us what he can do at a good level. He's not unbeatable. I mean, I'd said in recent years that I thought people were sleeping on Martin Bakole. I even did a couple of videos at different points in the past couple of years saying, look at what he's been doing to some of these durable, tough journeymen. Rodney Hernandez, Yotaro Pereira, you had also Marius Vuk. He was beating up and stopping them. And other guys weren't really doing that. So we knew he had heavy hands, but could he put it together? And I think he has improved. He's more polished. But I think from what we knew of Tony Yoka, Yoka certainly had the skill set, but in this fight it proved out he did not have the heart. And getting to that knockdown in round 5, the commentator adamant that Yoka just randomly out of the blue sprained his ankle, and that led him to touching down with his hands to sort of support himself. He was trying to say it's not a knockdown. It's like, well, if you touch down with your gloves, it is a knockdown. But going back and watching that half a dozen times, because I thought at the time, live, it was a delayed reaction. And then the commentators trying to convince us otherwise. But I went back, before I recorded this video, I watched rounds 1, rounds 5, and also the last couple of rounds, just to sort of re-jog my memory, especially about Tony Yoka running and just surviving the last part. But in terms of that round 5 knockdown, I just thought that was a delayed reaction. There was a right hand, straight right hand that came in, and a short left hook that came in after. And about 2 seconds later, delayed reaction, and obviously he was hurt. I think it was a legitimate knockdown, but it is by the by. It is what it is at this point. Martin Bakole gets the win. So I'll be doing some follow-up videos and talking about some of this stuff on Patreon, especially about Yoka, around the what next, that sort of stuff. But next fight, Kubrat Pulev and Jerry Forrest. And heading into that one, I said, this is a real sort of crossroads fight for both, because heading into this one, there was a case to say Jerry Forrest on the improve, a guy maybe about top 25 in the world, there or thereabouts. Kubrat Pulev, he'd had that fight with Frank Mir. It wasn't really boxing. His last professional boxing fight was Anthony Joshua, and he got stopped in, 9 rounds. But there, obviously he was hurt early in that one. Joshua seeming gassed out, and it went more rounds than possibly it should have. But ultimately, he was heading into this one. We hadn't seen him really in the boxing context for basically a couple of years. What was left? What were we going to see? What was Kubrat Pulev going to show off? What did he have left in the tank? And that was the real question. And it was more than I thought it would be. It was a very competitive first 3 rounds, and arguably you could have had it 2-1 to Forrest or 2-1 to Pulev, but it was back and forth, competitive action. But after that, Kubrat Pulev caught Jerry Forrest with some shots, and it was all total domination from there. And arguably, what was it, round 7 or 8 or 8 or 9, whatever it was, a couple of rounds towards the back end of the fight, Forrest was basically out on his feet, and the referee looked like he was about to jump in a couple of times. But Kubrat Pulev controlled and dominated that fight. It proved that he's still a guy probably inside the top 15. Maybe not in the top 10. I think we need to see him at a slightly higher opposition to get a better gauge. Forrest is very good at a certain level. And remembering, we saw him face Michael Hunter get a draw. He really won that fight. He faced Zhang Jilei. He was getting beaten up early. He ended up coming back and taking a draw and almost stopping Zhang. So I think there's a case to say that this was a good barometer. I didn't know where he was, and I think now we know. He's still got something left. They're still talking about him making another run towards the title. And on the strength of that performance, I mean, we need to see one more big fight. I mean, the commentators were going a bit over the top saying, hey, he's ready for a title shot. It's like, well, beating Jerry Forrest doesn't earn you a title shot, one fight off a loss. I mean, maybe if you're Berman Stavern and the WBC's involved, yeah, okay, well, that could happen. But in this case, if he faces maybe a top 15 guy and performs well, it'd be hard to argue against that he's putting himself in position for another title shot. And he proved he certainly got something left in the tank. That jab was still good. The right hand, a lot of power in it. He was working the uppercut in as the fight wore on. It was a solid performance. I'd sort of written Pulev off a little bit before and thought he was done. And what is he now? 41 years old, 42, there or thereabouts. He's still going, and he's still got something to offer the heavyweight division. Can he win another title? Well, let's not go too far on the basis of stopping a guy who's about top 25-ish in the world. We need more. We need to see him in with a guy that is really contending at the top level, because there are levels as you sort of step up. Even in that sort of top 30 or so, you get to a certain point and it just gets so much harder. The guys get so much better. The other fight, which I'll briefly touch on, which was really out of the blue, was Agit Kabayel. So he returns to the ring versus Pavel Sour and gets a first round stoppage. 4 knockdowns. I was just like, wow, this is a bolt from the blue. And I suspect, though, and I'm going to be talking about this also on Patreon in a video that I'll be doing as a bit of a catch-up because I was sick all week. I think this is a case of, this was all about rankings. And I went and had a look at the rankings and when he last fought. Basically, it was a year ago, or 11 months. He needed to get in there so he wasn't deemed inactive and dropped out of the rankings, because he has rankings in the IBF. He's quite high there. He's ranked in the WBC. He's ranked in the WBO. If he's going to continue to do something, he needs to stay at least somewhat and pretend to be somewhat active. Remembering this guy has been Mr. Annual Fight. Last year it was Kevin Johnson. The year before, what was it, Andre Ridden? Like, since Derek Chisora performance, 5.5 years ago, whatever it was, he has just fought once a year. Biggest waste of talent in the heavyweight division in this era, because the guy just hasn't been fighting and it's been diminishing returns on the opponent front. Pavel Sour was looking to basically fall over every time he was punched. He was getting up and he didn't even look like he was hurt. So I was questioning some of what was happening. And after the 4th knockdown, where he didn't even seem to be hurt again, it was all over. So I think this is more about rankings. I sort of looked just ahead of this video just to confirm my suspicions. And I'm pretty sure that's what it was about. Because otherwise, maybe he would have been at risk of being dropped out. And then it's a long way back to sort of a couple of fights to sort of take positions again. And potentially in the next year or two, maybe there is going to be some fracturing of the belts. Perhaps he wants to go, okay, well, I'm going to at least be in the position for the different sanctioning bodies where I can. Not ranked in the WBA, but some of the WBA rankings are crazy. Given the fact he's almost not been fighting, it's more surprising he's not in the WBA rankings, because some of those rankings are outrageous, as I mentioned. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this first video back. Martin Bakole, he fought as I thought that he would. He'd come out heavy-handed, throwing bombs, and that was in line with the way that he fights. Tony Yoka just completely under-delivered. The chin cracked, he didn't want it. Disappointing. Pulev proved he's got something left. He's not ready to be put out to pasture and sent to the glue factory. And you had Agit Kabayel, the biggest disappointment in the heavyweight division in terms of talent and not fighting. He was back to, what do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.